Great, I think we're going to give everyone a few minutes to jump on here.
Fair enough. I guess they didn't hear the grandfather clock.
No, exactly. That was just for you and me. Keeps us on time.
Yeah, you are missing it. 77 degrees right now.
Yeah, I seem to have left that behind.
And it's going to be 86 tomorrow, so we're getting there.
Yeah, making me jealous over here.
It's beautiful. I think, you know, I was thinking this morning, I went for a beautiful walk in the park, and I thought, I think this is us getting a little gift from the heavens because of what we went through. It's just been
days ahead, right?
As you know, usually spring in New York is so terrible, but this has just been on and off spectacular.
Well, long may it last. Throughout the summer would be nice. We'll just give everyone, I see a lot of people pouring in here. We'll just give everyone maybe another minute and we can get started.
Enables me to frantically return slacks.
Perfect. Great. I think we're probably good to get started. I see a lot of people have poured in, so thank you everyone for joining. It is lovely to have you with us. So on behalf of Women for Women International, again, a big thank you for joining us. Hopefully a very exciting and certainly very timely discussion ahead. My name is Anoushka Mehta. I am the head of Gender Lens Finance at HSBC, and I also have the great honor of being on the board and the global board of Women for Women International. So for those of you who don't know, Women for Women International is an organization that works with women in countries affected by conflict and war. The organization supports the most marginalized women to earn and save money, improve health and well-being, influence decisions in their home and community, and connect for networks for support. So as you can imagine, partnerships with like-minded organizations are an invaluable part to these support networks. So with saying that, I'm absolutely thrilled to have Sallie Krawcheck joining us today. She is the CEO and co-founder of Ellevest, a digital-first, mission-driven investment platform for women and by women. So the goal of Ellevest is to get more money into the hands of women, which I think we'll all agree is incredibly important and perhaps more important than ever before with everything that's going on in the world. So very excited to talk about that today, Sallie. Sallie needs absolutely no introduction, but maybe to give you her quick background, Sallie is a financial expert and has an incredible insight into the world of investing, especially for women in investing. Her professional mission is to help women reach their financial and professional goals, thus enabling them to lead better lives and unleashing that positive ripple effect on their own families, communities, societies, and the economy at large. Before launching Ellevest, Sallie had an incredibly successful career on Wall Street, where she worked at a number of different firms holding various senior positions. So be that at Merrill Lynch, Smith Barney, US Trust, Citi, Sanford Bernstein, the list goes on. Sallie is also widely recognized as one of the most influential women in business. Again, another long list here of accolades, being recognized in Fortune magazine, Forbes, Fast Company, Entrepreneur magazine. So needless to say, we are absolutely delighted to have her with us today. And no doubt we have a huge amount to learn from her experience and her expertise. So in terms of what we hope to cover today, we're hoping to have a discussion around how women have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, the impact on the gender wealth gap specifically, the role women can play in the recovery, and then maybe a little bit around sort of how to manage everyday finances and long-term financial goals from the expert herself. So before we get started, just a couple of quick logistical pieces. So Sallie and I are going to have a discussion here for about 35, 40 minutes, and during which your microphones are all going to be muted. But fear not, there is going to be sort of 15 to 20 minutes at the end of this session for your Q&A. So please start submitting those into the Q&A function or into the chat panel, and we'll try and get through as many of those as we possibly can. So I think that's enough from me. Let's go ahead and get started and hear from Sallie. So Sallie, let's kick off with something maybe a little lighter, a little bit more informal. I think everyone's now heard from me your sort of professional bio, but everyone wants to hear a little bit about you specifically. So maybe can you share a fun fact about yourself to get us started?
A fun fact about myself.
Hardest question probably of the day.
You might not expect this, but I love to cook. I've gone to several cooking schools. I love to bake. I love to barbecue. I love to roast. I love to braise. Obviously never on a weeknight. That's leftovers from the fridge. But on the weekends, I tend to revert to a little Betty Crocker 1950s.
Love that. I'm sure the over the pandemic and being at home more and stuff has only spurred you on a little bit more, right? In terms of,
well, I did more of it for sure. I refuse though to get caught up in the sourdough bread, movement. What I actually did instead is I had this enormous desire for foods from my childhood, and so would ask my mother for old recipes, and then my brother, sister, and I would each cook them on a weekend and sort of take pictures of things we hadn't eaten since we were 6 and 7 years old.
I love that. I was actually going to ask, did you get into the sourdough or the banana bread phase? But clearly the answer is no. No, thank you for sharing that. I think it's always nice to kick off with that. But look, let's get down to business here, I suppose, right? So, Sallie, I think what could be really helpful is kind of to set the current scene a little bit, right? I think you and I both know that the COVID-19 pandemic has truly disproportionately affected women in a number of different ways. And a lot of people are referring to the crisis as the she-cession. So, can you talk us through that a little bit, right? What does that mean, and why is that just so worrying?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm such a fan of this organization and have been for years and years, and really am so appreciative of the work the organization does. So anything y'all need from me, I'm thrilled to be part of it. And we really are all aligned in different parts of the world in different ways, that when we rise up women, we rise up everybody. And, we look at it through the developed market lens of money. And I love to say, nothing bad happens when women have more money. And usually some smarty will raise their hand and say, well, they spend it. He. And you're like, yes, they grow the economy, which is something, we all are looking for after the depression that we went through last year. Obviously, their sons and daughters are better off. Society is better off when we have lower wealth gaps. There's less anger in society, more harmonious. Nonprofits are better off. The markets are better off. And so each of us in our own way looks to lift women. What the pandemic made clear for all of us is that the progression that women have seen in the United States of America over the past handful of decades was built on a rickety foundation. And I think the quote for me last year from Jessica Calarco, a sociologist, was, other countries have social safety nets, the US has women. And the inequality and the internalized biases were in full effect last year. And, we saw women disproportionately losing their jobs because they are caught in the service industry. We found them disproportionately risking their lives. When women were even privileged enough to work from the home, men's productivity went up 50%, women's went down something like 30 to 50%, because as we all saw in all the Zooms, they had all the kids hanging on them. And we typically do more housework and more childcare, and that exploded when the pandemic hit for each of us. Men are now being promoted at a rate of 3 to 1 for women because of this productivity difference. And women, what really drives me slightly berserk is this view that, oh, and by the way, at the same time, women chose to leave the workforce. BS. What happened is, in families when there was no, the rickety childcare, right? We're holding on, we got the nursery on the corner, we're sending the kids to the nursery. When that closed and, oops, someone's got to take care of the kids. Well, honey, if you're making $1 and I'm making 80 cents, or if we're a family of color, you're making $1 and I'm making 60 cents. There's no choice as to who stays at home. There's an economic imperative as to who stays at home. And it drives me crazed. When we frame it as a choice that women make, it is an imperative based on decades of patriarchy. So we have seen a regression in the progress of women in the United States on the order of decades. And then as the economy recovers, men are going back to work at a greater rate. Again, not all the childcare places are ever going to reopen. I mean, that's it, they're done, right? And so then we have the pundits who are like, you know, a couple weeks ago, the employment snapback isn't as much as we thought we would. Say some of the smartest men I know. What could it be? Why aren't people returning to work? It must be a data issue. Maybe they're making so much money on, you know, from unemployment. They are lazy. They don't want to, like, no, we don't have anyone to take care of our children. Sorry, Anoushka, I got a little passionate there.
No, I'm right there with you.
But it's like these folks, often whom are men, are just looking right, but you know, it's sort of like, no, it's the childcare issue. And they're like, what could it be? It's the childcare issue. Very confusing.
Absolutely. You can see there's some comments coming through here that are in full agreement with you, Sallie. And you know what? I think the thing that really keeps me up at night, I think, is that point you mentioned about sort of very rickety foundations that we have, right? That I was reading something that says that we have lost decades in the last 12 months of progress, right? The numbers are just egregious in a number of different ways. And the fact that we've lost so much in just 12 to 15 short months, to me, is the most horrifying thing. Shows
how it was built on sand.
Absolutely.
And by the way, we tell ourselves stories, right? And so we tell ourselves the story as professional women. And I told myself this story forever, with grit and hard work and determination, leaning in, knowing my worth, asking for the raise the right way, being not too hard, not too soft at work. You know, with all this, then I can make it. And, you know, the truth is, it was built on these rickety foundations where whoever made it and whoever didn't wasn't always based on hard work. It was who had access to childcare. It's who worked for Harvey Weinstein, you know, versus worked for someone who, you know, was more of this century as opposed to the last century. But one thing I want to draw attention to is I think we too, as women, have actually been measuring our progress in what I would argue is the wrong way, or maybe an incomplete way. You know, one way we measured is so-and-so is now the CEO of such and such. Like, that's amazing, amazing. We will be there when we don't know the names of all the women CEOs, right? So one or two here, amazing, but I needed to be a big blob of them. The second way we've been measuring our progress has been the gender pay gap. And there's a lot of attention to that. Something like 58 million Google articles, if you Google it, slowly moving in the right direction, not where it should be, but 82 cents to a man's dollar, pre-pandemic, moving in the right direction. I would argue the better metric to look at is the gender wealth gap. Google that, you get 15,000 mentions. It barely shows up. If pay gap is how much we bring in, wealth gap is how much we keep and have. Pay gap is 82 cents. Wealth gap is 32 cents. Pay gap moving in the right direction pre-pandemic. Wealth gap moving in wrong direction pre-pandemic. For Black women, it's 1 penny in the United States. For brown women, it's 1 penny, and certainly went further backwards during the pandemic. And so just as we talk about the racial wealth gap has increased, so has the gender wealth gap, but we don't talk about it. What has driven that increase are a few things, but in terms of the increase, it's the fact that really the financial system, we have been shut out of it. Whether it's that we have credit card debt with higher interest rates than men for the same FICO score, mortgages, higher interest rate than men, more student loan debt, or of course, my personal favorite, the gender investing gap, where we've looked at that industry and it just hasn't served us well. And so as a result of it, the financial services industry has been less accessible for women than for men. Society has given women a load of bunk in terms of how good we are with money, whether we deserve money, whether, you know, we can invest well. And so we've internalized negative messages. And as a result of that, that gender wealth gap has been increasing, which is, you know, frankly, horrifying.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that we still talk about a gender wealth gap today, right, when women are 51% of the workforce, they're controlling more and more of consumer spending. I believe it's north of 80% now. Right? The fact that this still exists, it just shows how much we still have to sort of gain. So I suppose a follow-up question to that, Sallie, is, so, what actions can be taken to start driving greater equality in investing and to start kind of narrowing that gender wealth gap? What can be done? What tangible type of actions can be taken?
Well, I founded Ellevest. And it's really interesting because, of course, I ran Merrill Lynch, the wealth management business, Smith Barney, et cetera. And people say to me, well, why didn't you form an Ellevest there? And the answer, of course, is when you run a company that at the time had close to, I think, 19 billion of revenues and 2.5 billion of net income, and the population was, call it 86% male, because that's what financial advisors are of a certain age. That's a polite way of saying a bit more older, and doing really well. And everybody in it is making money and enjoying themselves and doing what they do. And the business may not be gaining share, but it's growing in line with the market. And by the way, the symbol of the company is a bull. So just to make sure that you're not confused by the 86% of the employees who are men, there's a bull, to just be like, this really, we're not kidding, this is really for men. And so to have formed an Ellevest, which is by women for women, the transplant wouldn't have taken, the body would have rejected the organ. So I came to the conclusion that it had to be first of all, I had to come to the conclusion that women needed their own investing firm, money firm. And Anushka, I don't know, when you heard of Ellevest, you were probably like, that is stupid. And what is Sallie doing? She had such a great career. What's this? Women don't need their own thing. Money is gender neutral. There have been a zillion of these. They've all failed. It's going to be university. And you might have thought that because that's what I thought. And, it's women's own fault. They're risk averse. Everybody knows women are risk averse. Like, it's, in the financial services industry, we say like
risk aware, I like to say.
Right?
Risk
and
aware.
we say risk aware. And so we were actually the first who said, okay, why do we think women are risk averse? And the industry said, because they don't invest as much as men do. I'm like, okay, well, that's one possible belief, but maybe another is they're not risk averse. You're just not offering the product that motivates them to invest. Yeah. Maybe they don't want to trade. Maybe they're not interested in Bitcoin. Maybe they don't want to figure out GameStop. Maybe large cap value, small cap growth isn't floating their boat. Maybe if we start an Ellevest and we take them seriously and we say, what are women looking for? Sometimes which we can't articulate, right? What we found is to reach our financial goals. We also found it's often, and of course you'll appreciate this, investing with an impact, and making sure that their money is, if not always, doing exactly what they want to do, at least causing, not causing as much harm. And so we took them, we managed to get funding from the Melinda Gateses, the Penny Pritzkers, the Venus Williams, about really sort of a who's who of women who believe in our mission, who also want to make a return on their money, believe you me. And we were the first that built from the ground up, first a digital investment platform for women, the only one that takes into account gender. Why does that matter? Well, because if you're planning for retirement and you're a woman, you earn less, your salary peaks sooner, you take more career breaks, you die later. If the algorithm thinks you're average, which they all do, you run out of money. For men, you die with too much money. Oh no, you run out of money. Okay. We then added a private wealth business because we found, more women who've been successful were also want to be part of this. And we found that we were riding a bit of a wave in which a number of women said, I'm tired of having my money support companies that haven't supported me. Yeah. I don't want to have my money managed at a company I wouldn't let my daughter work at. And then from there, we've added a ton of coaching. We found women are really looking for money coaching, whether it's in the workforce or outside of the workforce, certified financial planners, financial advisors. And so we built something that I almost think of as a financial wellness company, which is all about, entire mission is to get more money in the hands of women, and however we do that. Now, we have really been the only one that has reached escape velocity. We're now at, I think, 1.1 billion of assets under management. Many tried, many failed. And I think it's because they let too much of the old ways stay in their brain, as opposed to really listen to what women are looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to perhaps those initial naysayers as well, I think, the quote you said up front, right, that nothing bad happens when women have more money, it kind of sums it up really perfectly, right? That it's good, not just for the women, but for the ripple effects that they create in societies, communities at large. And certainly, I think that's something we've seen through the programs that Women for Women International does as well. So, the signature program is, Stronger Women, Stronger Nations. And it's all about the fact that you're supporting women, but you see the impact that they create more broadly. And so, I can imagine that you're seeing the same thing through Ellevest, right? That you're supporting the women, but there's going to be a huge tidal wave that comes out of that.
Well, and look, both at the individual level and the macro level. So back up the individual level, and we probably should have said this at the very beginning, money is women's number one source of stress. The number one driver of her confidence in her future is taking action on her money, saving, investing, listening to a webinar, workshop on how to buy a house. When she does something about it, she feels better. Because she sees, this is doable. And then to your point, the ripple effect of it, the woman brings money into the home, the family is better off, the ripple effect. But it's so fun because, a few months ago, I'm in New York, as you and I were discussing earlier. I stood in line for 3.5 hours to vote, early voting. And it was drizzly and it was miserable and it was rainy and all that stuff. And about 2 hours in, the woman behind me, I flipped, my bag was a certain way and I flipped it around. She's like, "Oh my gosh, are you at Ellevest?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am." Burst into tears.
No kidding.
Thank you. This source of stress, I couldn't think. Women lose weeks to presenteeism as they worry about money. And she said, "Y'all have just taken, I feel like I'm no longer alone. You've sort of taken, you're the only, no one else is talking to me." And so that's good. I love to always tease, I've made people cry before because I used to work at Citigroup and Bank of America. So they cry in frustration all the time, but this is the first time you actually get the folks, with the relief of the stress.
Yeah. That it's a huge impact on their lives, right? It's not this sort of removed thing, it's all encompassing. But, whilst we're on that point, maybe kind of going in from that sort of macro to the micro and the sort of, what does this mean to us as sort of individuals, right? And again, a point to illustrate this, through Women for Women International is that, we do see just huge benefits and impacts through, the stipends that we provide, but importantly through the literacy training and the support around the practice of saving and making financial decisions. And, of course, the circumstances for these women is slightly different, but no doubt that principle of having sort of more agency, if you will, over your money applies across the board, regardless of your circumstances, where you are, all of those sort of pieces. So it's like kind of going from that macro to the micro, what are your sort of top tips, if you will, for women to start taking more control over their money and their finances? And how do you empower them that way?
Yeah. So great question. And you and I are in total agreement. It is agency. And there's not a single one of us on this call who doesn't know a woman, and maybe that woman is ourselves, who hasn't been able to leave a relationship that didn't work for her because she couldn't afford it, who couldn't leave a job that she hated because she couldn't afford it, who didn't take the trip around the world because she couldn't afford it, who didn't quit to start the business because, and this is where the rubber meets the road, which is we lose degrees of freedom. And by the way, the numbers around the investing gap and the wealth gap are huge. Investing gap only can cost some women as much as the pay gap. And that can be hundreds of thousands, and for some women, $1 million+ for the women on this. And it's all because, as we saw last year, the stock market wants to go up and typically does. There's volatility and the power of compounding where you earn returns on the returns. And so we tend to underestimate the power of investing and how that money has historically grown over time. So what can we do as individuals? Well, one answer is just do it. Come on over to Ellevest. If you go to ellevest.com, partner or partners, WFWI, Women for Women International. We have a special present, a special gift. My mom told me never go anywhere without bringing a gift to help get everybody started and some resources for you. So there's the just do it, but there's also the words we use to ourselves, the stories we tell. And sadly, in the United States, the story we've been told as women is we're not good with money, we're not worthy of money, we are risk averse. And as a result, so I mean, you think about it in households still today, little boys see daddy investing. Little girls don't see mommy investing. Only a single-digit % of women take the lead in investing in households, and it's a teens % that take a joint position. They see her budgeting and coupon clipping, okay? At schools today, little boys get better grades for the same answers as little girls, for the same answers. And then when they grow up, and now that I'm going to tell you this, you're going to see it everywhere, there's a ton of male money media, which is very bullish and expansive and growth oriented, be it CNBC, which treats money as sport, or Bloomberg or Cranes or Barron's, or any of those. For women, think about it. There's no money out there, right? There's some groups on social that come together, but there is no gathering place. And when our traditional female media talks to us about money, 2/3 of it today is negative. And it's about how financial planning doesn't have to be really, really hard and buckle your seatbelt, we're going to do this. The other third breaks between patronizing, take this money quiz. I mean, can you imagine if Jim Cramer ever asked Mike Santoli to take a money quiz? What's your money type? Are you a carrier or Miranda when it comes to money? And then the other, which drives me over the edge, the rest of it is guilt-inducing. What some might say, gaslighting. Don't buy the latte and you can become a millionaire. Don't have the facial, don't have the pedicure, etc. These are coded messages to women only. There's nothing the equivalent to men. Don't buy the new personal electronic, and invest the money. Don't buy the pickup truck. Don't buy the power tools. It's all to women. And what it essentially is saying is, forget that gender pay gap and the fact that you had to quit your job during the pandemic and that you've been given these messages around money. It's your fault, right? It's totally your fault. And if you frivolous young thing, if you would just stop with the pedicures, you could have and then you're like, oh man, I just, you're keeping me down. I'm trying, I just want a pedicure, Yes. And of course the math doesn't even work. And so we've got to, the result of it is that when you ask a man for synonyms around money, he says power, strength, independence. Woman, loneliness, isolation, uncertainty. Okay. And so, women prefer to talk about any topic other than money because money is unladylike. We prefer to talk about sex. Remember when talking about sex used to be unladylike? No, now it's money. Our own death. We talk about our own death more than money. And so we just end up isolated. And if you're isolated, you don't know what raise to ask for. Yeah. You don't know how to invest. And there's no clock ticking on the wall that says you just lost $100 today because you didn't invest, 5 years ago, right? Now you lost $105 a day. And I always say, if we lost, and it can be those kind of numbers over time. And I always say, if I had a hole in my pocketbook and $100 fell out, how long would it take me to fix the hole? Maybe 2 days, but not 3. And yet, we wait, right? Until we can get the A in investing, right? Until we can get the confidence, until we can find the right financial advisor. And the only thing worse than, as bad as waiting is, or we outsource it to our spouse. If we're in a different sex marriage, 80% of the time we die single because we live longer than he does. When that money comes back to us, 74% of us have a negative surprise. 74%, not 50, 74. So the worst thing you can do is nothing. And the second worst thing you can do is outsource it to your partner.
And the third worst thing is to not buy yourself that latte or get the pedicure that you should get.
Right. I mean, come on. Life is short. We work so hard. We should have the latte, please. I did have my first pedicure 2 weeks ago. I wept.
It's a good moment, right? It's a good moment after a year. But no, Sallie, that is incredibly helpful advice. And I hope I was trying to scribble things down myself here to remind myself later of all the things you just said. But I think one piece as well that I think you mentioned this earlier around women, and I also think it's certainly the case for sort of the newer generations coming through, right? The millennials, the Gen Z, is that they do also care deeply about supporting causes which are sort of mission aligned to their values, right? And kind of thinking about that in the context of philanthropy. And, how do you start to think about philanthropy in the sense of your sort of outgoings, right? How do you spend, save, but also give comfortably? And how do you start thinking about that as you kind of start your investing and sort of money journey?
Well, so it's interesting because before you're ever ready to or able to donate significant amounts of money, you can have an impact through impact investing. And so this is something, when you're still making the $3 contribution, as you begin to put a little bit out of every paycheck into an investing account, you can't just say, okay, I can have no impact. No, let me get into an ESG fund or a gender lens fund or something else like that. Side note, by the way, we are all impact investors. We are all impact investors. We may not know the impact we're having, but whatever we do with our money has an impact. It's when we go out and buy from Amazon, we have had an impact, right? We put more money in Jeff Bezos' pocket. When we buy from a corner bookstore owned by, an independent bookseller, we've had an impact. When we invest in GE, when we've invested in whatever. So I think that can be an eye opener for folks. If we choose not to invest, it's too much. You leave your money in the bank, you are voting for that bank. Okay. So every step of the way. So I think when you start off, it's important when one starts off to, we talk about the 50-30-20 rule, 50% of take home pay to needs, 30% to fund, 20% to future you. And those numbers change. Oh, I just graduated from college. My apartment's so expensive. Fine. It's 70%, to needs. But at the 20% to future you want to pay off that credit card debt.
Yeah.
You want to build an emergency fund. You want to be investing in a 401k. You want to be investing in a brokerage account. And you may choose of that, 20% of the 30% for fund, some amount, goes to contributions. My husband and I sit down every year. We have a budget that comes out of our 30% for fun. Okay. It's fun to put money. It's fun to do great things. And we jointly decide, what that goes to. And it's sort of an expression of our values. So there are many different ways you can express your values through your money. It's not always just giving it away.
I really like that concept of everyone as an impact investor, right? It just is how you kind of frame it and how you think about it. But no, that's really, really helpful advice. And again, I hope everyone is taking notes on the percentages that you mentioned and how you're going about things. But one piece I'd love to kind of just jump on, and again, I think you mentioned this earlier, is this sort of sense of community and the collective, right? Which is, through my day job, but also through Women for Women International, I think I've seen the incredible power of community and the collective, right? I think there's certainly an individual responsibility on all of us, but I think there is just so much more that we can achieve together when we're trying to solve for these incredibly big goals, right? When it comes to shrinking the gender wealth gap or otherwise. And again, we see this play out at Women for Women International in a number of ways, right? That, in the groups that they form together, we see them rely on each other for support, strength, solidarity. They've all been impacted by conflict and displacement. And one sort of example that always stands out to me is the fact that a lot of these participants in the villages sort of form savings and loan associations to hold their savings together and actually use that as sources for lending funds. And so I guess, is there a sort of analogy that we can draw here in some way around what can we be doing together, right, to support each other and talk about investing more and start shrinking that gender wealth gap together, right? What can we be doing? What would your call to action be?
Well, so my answer might surprise you as we go into the workplace for this one. So men play business as a team sport. They promote each other, they talk each other up, they say good things, they put each other on their boards, they have their kids work for each other. It's all all this big team sport, and they're winning.
Mhm.
Women, for whatever reason, we've somehow internalized that business is an individual sport for us. It is perhaps because of the rows upon rows of books at the bookstores on career advancement that tell us how each of us can individually own our own success, right? A book's not good if it's, hey, you got to get together a community of women and you want to, that feels big and amorphous.
Mhm.
What feels doable is, ask for the raise like this. Sit down with your boss 6 months in advance of the time the raise is given, but make out of it, right? Don't be too hard. Don't be too soft. Don't be too this. Take these kind of classes, code, go to math, whatever. Okay. And because women, well, oh my gosh, we all get A's. Everyone on this call strove for A's. It's like, here is a recipe. And if I can get an A, I can make it because she did. And if I don't, it's my fault. Or maybe I just need to buy another book. And in the workplace, to be perfectly frank, when we have promoted each other, historically, it's hurt us.
Yeah.
When women have promoted women, people of color, women of color, oh, they're in it together. And if that individual who you promoted failed, well, see, I told you, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to if you promote a white dude, I love white dudes, by the way, I've been married to a couple of them. You promote a white dude and he fails, nobody's gonna be like, oh, white dudes are not, are not very good at their job. So we somehow forgot what we knew in college, which is we're stronger when we travel in packs, which is why women today, the pandemic's changed the numbers, but pre-pandemic, 51% of the workforce, right? Majority. To your point, direct 85% of consumer spending, have $6 trillion investable assets. And yet we talk about being empowered, which is a very passive thing, right? If we tomorrow said, you know what, gals, this just isn't working. I mean, like the way we're treating the environment just doesn't work. Let's do something about it. It would change immediately.
Yeah.
Right? We have the power to do it, but we haven't had, sort of the rallying cry. In fact, for a bit, a couple of years ago, I'm like, where is our Gloria Steinem? Where's our Gloria Steinem? Where is that woman who, when things were going away, I wasn't, not to bring politics into it, but where I'm like, I don't like the direction this is going. Who is she who's going to lead us? We didn't have one at the time. Joe Biden may be her. But that's a different topic for a different day.
That's another panel discussion in itself.
It's a whole other thing, but he's not playing small. He's not playing small.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, no, incredibly helpful advice. Well, before we turn over to Q&A, Sallie, because selfishly I could keep going and ask you all the questions all day long, but maybe just any sort of final tips, final words of wisdom before we turn it over to Q&A.
Yeah, I think it really, I always say to groups of successful individuals, if not us, who? And it's so easy to go to these things and just say, yeah, I really need to shop for more women businesses. And then you don't, and we really literally have to take action. That whatever we were doing last week, it wasn't enough, right? Mm-hmm. And we can wait for other people to do it. But if those of us who care about this aren't shopping from women-owned businesses, investing with women-run companies, investing in women-run businesses, and not to the exclusion of men at all. But right now we're so far over here. In fact, we're talking about impact investing. I always love to say we're all gender lens investors.
Yeah.
What? No, we're not, right? I didn't make the conscious decision to invest in women. No, you're investing almost 100% in men right now, right? The stocks that you've chosen that you're investing in the S&P 500, you're gender lens investing in men. And so we have to make a conscious effort and take action in order to change it. And if this group won't do it, who the heck is going to? And if we're all happy with how everything's going, then we don't have to do anything different. But what I do see coming that I really do love are women founding businesses, solving problems for women. And no, women don't get as much VC money as men do, but the cost of starting businesses has come down a great deal. And I think a real path forward are women saying either, you know what, I know the company I work for now, we went through a pandemic together. We saw the words, I think I'm going to move on. Or I have a great idea, I can't wait to start it. And with small amounts of money, because the cost of technology is down, the cost of real estate sure is down. You can get part-time people, not full-time people. We can all Zoom now. We don't have to get on planes. Everything is coming down in terms of starting businesses. And what I'm loving is women today are starting businesses, solving problems for women that men don't even see are there. So whether, and yes, some are in the fashion industry, whether it's Rent the Runway, where the insight was women want to have a lot of choice, but don't have to own it. Whether it's The Real, where women really want to, with the environmental issues with fashion, want to recycle, right? And want to trade and play and have fun. I'll even say Goop, and I know people love to titter about Goop, but Gwyneth's insight is the medical industrial industry doesn't work well for women. The eat all the T-bone you want, and then we'll crack your chest later after you have the heart attack. Women are like, you know what? I'd like to do yoga first, if that's okay. And sure, I'll take a candle along the way. But it was a pretty damn important insight. Bumble. Who knew women were getting harassed on dating sites, except for women, right? Yeah. And so people giggled when she founded, who needs a Bumble? And I think Ellevest is that as well, that people giggled in the industry when we did it as a junior varsity cutesy sort of thing. And it's funny, they may still think we're not going to succeed, but I knew we're starting to be successful when the senior guys on Wall Street started to call me to ask me if their daughters could work for me. And then I'm like, you know it deep down. But that I do see a very, in the United States, a very hopeful trend of women, coming out of the pandemic. Life is short. I know my company. The cost of starting business is coming down. Let me go out and do something that can change women's lives.
Absolutely. So with that, I think the message there is, everyone, this is our time. We should be taking the bull by the horns, for lack of a better term there, given that we know what you were talking about bulls earlier. But, let's seize the moment, right? There's so much that we can do and so much we can move forward together. So some very inspiring words there. So thank you, Sallie. So we have questions pouring through for you, Sallie. So I'm going to start going through some of these now. And thank you to everyone who is submitting them. So please continue to do so. We're going to get through as many as we can. So here's the first one, which is, my mother taught me that talking about money was verboten. A young women now learning how their salary compares to men doing the same job. They seem to be much more assertive than in my generation. Are they fighting for equal or higher salaries?
Yeah, they are. There. Believe me, they're talking about it at Ellevest. Yeah, I keep getting. I'm like,
what have I done?
I do think there is more conversation around it. I think we have much further to go. And by that, I recently saw some data that shows that millennial women are even more likely today to have their money managed by their husband or partner than baby boomer women. At first, I'm like, oh my gosh, we're regressing. And after a bit, I'm like, I don't know that we're regressing. The older women have already had the hard knocks. Yeah. They've already gotten divorced. Oh, I'm leaving you for the cutie youngie girl here. Don't have as much money as you thought we did, and I've seen it with a number of my friends where their spouse will pass away and they will find out what their monetary resources are during the worst week of their lives. And so I do fear that the younger generation has not learned that lesson well enough. And we urge everybody, I don't care if you have a joint checking account and you split whatever, just keep just be on top of your own retirement assets at a minimum, because you're likely to be on your own at the end of your life. And I would say your investments as well. But look, silence, is just, it's a form of repression. The fact that we have been taught that this is a topic that is embarrassing and unladylike, but don't teach that to the men, is really done a number on us. I sort of like to think, by the way, I sort of think about this as, I hope the trajectory here is like women's sports. That I remember back when I was in middle school, it was just not cute to play a sport. It was really cute to be a cheerleader, but volleyball or basketball. And so when I had the choice, I was in that cheerleader skirt. And then along came the Williams sisters and Billie Jean King and the US women's soccer team. And what they changed for us culturally is that being physically fit is part of a well-lived life. And it's not, manly or anything. It's part of a well-lived life. And I hope that we can do the same thing for money. That is part, a woman being good with money, talking about money is part of a well-lived life. We still just have too many, I was with a young woman who just was graduating from Barnard. I'm not good with money. I'm like, my God, you went to Barnard. Of course you're good with money. Like, stop it.
No, yeah.
I don't care if you got a C, you're studying Barnard, you're good with money. And of course she got like a B+. Oh, I'm terrible with it. And I'm like, no.
You need to change that.
I gotta do good enough, here we go.
Absolutely. Sticking on the sort of topic of your own money. So there are a couple of questions here, which is, what's one thing we can be doing as individual donors to be more effective in our philanthropy giving?
Well, you're probably a better person to answer that than I am. Look, I always think investing in things that you feel passionate about and then keeping up with it, not the X $1,000 for the table, the dinner is lovely. The gift that really touches your heart that doesn't come with a fancy, band and all that stuff, and where you have a personal interest and involvement and talk about it and make it part of your life, that ripple effect is so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to echo that, I think it's to your point, right? Finding something that really touches you. I think obviously I'm a little bit biased, but certainly, and I think everyone who knows me probably hears me talk about Women for Women International a little bit too much now, but I'm truly touched and incredibly humbled by the work that they do, and I feel honored to be part of the organization. And so, I think it's important to find something that, touches you and is mission aligned to you and is aligned with your values, as you say, right? Which I think makes it more meaningful in so many different ways. So no, thank you for sharing that, Sallie. Let's see, we've got a couple more coming in here. So do you have recommendations regarding life insurance policies for women who are married with kids?
I think my head of compliance would shoot me if I did, because there's so much that's personal that comes into play, how much you need, how much you have, your life circumstances. But come on over to Ellevest. We've actually got certified financial planners. What we're trying to do at Ellevest, to back up, we started with the mission to democratize investing for women. And over time, we've added that where we're trying to democratize access to financial coaching and advice for women. And by the way, it's all from what we're talking about now. What insurance policy should I have? Sitting down with a certified financial planner and, okay, let's see what you can afford. Let's see what the budget is. Oh, you can move some stuff around here. This is the kind of coverage you need today, et cetera, all the way to, believe it or not, executive coaches.
Yeah.
And in fact, when you say to women in the United States, what's the number one thing you want from a money company? They're like, oh, I want to make more money at work. And then, as you know, most of the big banks are like, would you like a high interest rate checking account? And you're like, okay. And so we thought, well, if we could get career coaches and executive coaches and democratize access to that, because even me, when I was CFO of Citi, they got me an executive coach. I'm like, score. The gentleman walks in, he's my dad's age. And he begins to give me advice in something I'm dealing with, which was so like wildly off base. I'm having trouble engaging with Vikram Pandit, my boss at the time. He's like, you go in there and you tell him and you, I'm like, I will be fired before 6 words.
This doesn't sound right.
Right. And so bringing people who reflect our community, in every different way and sort of democratize. So come over to Ellevest. When you become a member, we also, the prices are as reasonable as we can make them and stay in business. And so take a look over there. They can be helpful. And then we've got articles and stuff in the magazine that also can provide some guidance.
Amazing. No, thank you for that. So I suppose switching gears a little bit here, we were talking about obviously women-led businesses and, the fact that hopefully the barriers to entry for starting a business are coming down, but certainly we saw the amount of venture capital dollars going to female-founded businesses going down in 2020, which was already from a pretty low base. But one of the questions that's come in here is, what's your sort of top tips for a woman interested in starting a business? How do you go about doing this? Where do you begin?
Yeah. So by the way, I have one aside that I'm fascinated with, is not in the question, but I want to share it. A woman who's a venture capitalist, who's a friend of mine, actually has a hypothesis about the 2 reasons women raise less venture money on a percentage basis last year. And one was absolutely what we read about, which is men, in a point of stress, going to comfort, which is let me fund other men, and let me double down on the ones I'm invested in. The other one, which I am fascinated by and sort of felt, is that women tend to take direction. And what I mean by, and they did, and it hurt them. And what I mean by that is, you may recall last year, as we went into the pandemic, there was a letter from one of the big venture capitalists, very well known, is like, batten down the hatches. The last time this happened, we told you capital wouldn't be available for 2 years. Same thing this year, batten down the hatches, get yourself 2 years of runway. And women, and then all the boards were like, they said to batten down the hatches. And so I saw women friends of mine who were not in the hotel industry, who were not in the services industry, lay off half or a third of their employees to get their runway to 2 years. I didn't see a lot of men do that unless they were in those industries. And I did not. We certainly had those discussions, and I had to, really extend out the runway. But instead, I went to my company and said, I'm going to cut salaries by this amount for you, this amount for you. We're all in this together. I'm going to give you some of my equity to make up for it. And I don't want to be firing anybody into a pandemic. And so the board was like, okay, fine. If you're going to give me your equity, fine, right? And so we got through it with 100% of our employees intact, so we could hit our KPIs, our key performance indicators. We could raise money. And if you had, I have a number of friends who did what they were told, didn't hit the KPIs and can't raise. And so there's a lesson in there about not always, as an entrepreneur, you have to learn to not follow the rules. We as women have been so socialized to follow the rules, particularly when your board tells you to do it. But great innovators break rules. And so I didn't know I was going to be right. I mean, my co-founder was like, I overrode him on this. He's like, you're making a big mistake, because we should fire people and cut the salaries, right? Yeah. You may be wrong. And I'm like, I could be wrong. But anyway, so what the best advice, you got to be a rule breaker. You better have something you're passionate about. You better be ready for it to be hard, because it is so much harder than anybody tells you. You better be ready to think about it all the time. 3 o'clock in the morning, et cetera. And some people love that. I do. Some people, I think, like to go broad. Oh, I'm on 5 boards. I love it. I know a little bit about a bunch of stuff. I've always been deep. And so I like to know one thing. Back when I was a research analyst, I like to know one thing very deeply. But if you're not a deep person, you're a broad person, you'll want to think about it before you become an entrepreneur, and just expect to fail like 6 times every day.
It's very good advice. I mean, one thing I'll ask Sallie is, and I think we haven't had a chance to touch on this, but I think it's a great story, and it kind of leads on from what we were talking about earlier, sort of women supporting each other, and you as a female founder supporting other women-led businesses, because I know within the Ellevest platform, you've kind of now got capabilities to actually support other women-owned businesses, right? When you spend your dollars. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I think it's just a very interesting story.
Well, in a few different ways. So what I love about Ellevest is just the ripple effect through. So I mentioned who our investors are. Not all women by any means, but mission aligned, almost to a one, who believe in what we're doing. And by the way, it made my raise easier when I, instead of doing what's typically done, let me go find venture capitalists and convince them of my vision. Instead, I'm like, let me go find people who share a vision and convince them to invest money. Much easier, not easy, but much easier than to try to change someone's worldview on, Sand Hill Road. So we've got mission-aligned investors investing in a company where we are 75% women, 50% people of color, 20% plus identifying as LGBTQIA plus, helping women and women plus. We also have we also have portfolios that we put together for non-binary individuals, invest oftentimes in other women. And that is through investment portfolios that have that gender lens, both at the ETF side for women who are just starting out, even up to the alternative investments for women who are in our private wealth division. And we recently launched in our debit card a woman-led business cashback program based on the fact that 90% of women say, I would shop for women-owned businesses. I just don't know who they are. And so we have a cashback business in which you shop for women-owned businesses that are identified. They win because they get more business, and you win because you get cash back. And so we look for these places. Again, we love men, but the vast majority of financial services are for men, even though they say they're not. Even the new age apps, something like 75 to 85% of the downloads are by men. And so we're like, there's room for one of us to really be all about us, not give up anything in terms of sophistication, right? Of the technology, nothing. And in fact, the research says that women are better investors than men. I'm not allowed to say anything about our performance, but you just heard me.
We'll take the message, we'll take the hint. But look, I think that is all, unfortunately, we have time for today. I could keep going on and on, Sallie. Your insights are just fantastic. And so a huge thank you to you, Sallie, for your time today and for sharing all of your insights on this. And a huge thank you to everyone else for joining. Hopefully you found this an interesting conversation, and hopefully it's inspired you to unleash your financial power in some way. If you need a helping hand in doing that, I believe there are some links that are being thrown into the chat window right now. One from Ellevest that will lead you to the very kind offer that Sallie mentioned earlier in the conversation, and another to Women for Women International to see how you can learn more about the stories and see how you can support. But with that, again, I'm going to say a huge thank you to you, Sallie. Thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom, and hope to see everyone back here again soon. So thank you, and enjoy your day, everyone.
And I loved being with you. Let's grab a coffee when you get back to New York.
I would love to do that, Sallie.
I would love to. It'd be fun. Be fun.
Let's do it.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.